I'm Stephanie Mitchell, 32, and last month I walked into the Grand Palace restaurant with a $300 gift and high hopes for my mother's 60th birthday dinner. After years of rejection, I thought tonight might finally bridge our divide. Instead, Amanda Mitchell looked up, her diamond earrings catching the light, and smirked. "Sorry, sweetheart, this table's for family only," she said, pointing to a fold-out chair by the kitchen trash cans. Everyone laughed. 3 hours later, when the $4,600 bill arrived and the waiter looked expectantly at me, I simply smiled and said, "Not my table." That night, everything changed forever. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If my journey through family betrayal and finding self-worth resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Growing up as the Mitchell family scapegoat wasn't something I understood until my therapist explained the concept when I was 28. In our family photos, you could always spot the difference. My sister Brooke would be front and center, usually on our father Richard's shoulders or nestled in our mother Amanda's arms. I'd be slightly off to the side, often partially cropped out or with my mother's hand gripping my shoulder just a little too tight. The pattern was established early. When I brought home an A-, my mother would sigh and say, "Brooke never gets less than perfect scores." When I won second place in the science fair in 4th grade, my father barely looked up from his newspaper while my mother said, "Well, I suppose that's better than nothing." Meanwhile, Brooke's participation ribbon from the spelling bee was framed and displayed on the mantel. Amanda Mitchell was the undisputed queen of our household. Her word was law, her disapproval devastating, and her approval nearly impossible to obtain, at least for me. She had this way of looking at me, head slightly tilted, lips pursed, as if perpetually disappointed by my very existence. "Stephanie," she'd say, drawing out each syllable, "why can't you just be more like your sister?" My father, Richard, was physically present but emotionally absent. A successful attorney, he buried himself in work and deferred to my mother on all family matters. The few times I approached him alone, seeking support or intervention after particularly harsh treatment from my mother, he'd pat my head awkwardly and say, "That's just how your mother is. Try not to upset her." Then he'd retreat to his study, door firmly closed. One memory stands out vividly from my 12th birthday. I'd been dropping hints for weeks about a specific art set I wanted, nothing extravagant. Just a quality set of colored pencils and a sketchbook. My mother had nodded each time I mentioned it, so I allowed myself to hope. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs to find a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a basic pack of number 2 pencils and a spiral notebook. For school, my mother explained curtly. That afternoon, I overheard her on the phone ordering a $300 custom dollhouse for Brooke's birthday, still 2 months away. Despite the constant message that I wasn't good enough, I threw myself into academics. Perhaps if I couldn't earn love, I could at least earn respect. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University, and left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and a desperate need to prove my worth. College was transformative. For the first time, I found friends who valued me for exactly who I was. My roommate Rachel was particularly important, the sister I'd always wished I had. She noticed when I automatically took the worst seat at restaurants or apologized excessively for minor things. "Your family really did a number on you," she observed once, and that simple acknowledgement was like oxygen to someone who'd been underwater for years. After graduating with honors in business and marketing, I declined the corporate job offers and instead launched my own digital marketing agency. The early years were lean and difficult, but by 28, Mitchell Digital Strategies was turning a solid profit with clients across 3 states. Each milestone, first major client, first office space. First 6-figure year, I'd feel a momentary urge to call home and share my success. Sometimes I did. My mother's response was always some variation of, "Well, isn't that nice? Did you hear Brooke got promoted again?" My relationship with my family consisted of obligatory holiday phone calls and occasional visits that left me emotionally drained for days afterward. I maintained the connection out of some stubborn hope that eventually they'd see me, really see me, and be proud. 3 months before the infamous birthday dinner, I received a rare call from my mother. "Stephanie," she said, voice dripping with unusual warmth, "we're planning a special celebration for my 60th at the Grand Palace. It would mean so much to have both my daughters there." The invitation felt like a potential turning point. Perhaps age was softening her, perhaps this was an olive branch. I accepted immediately and marked my calendar. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I found myself daydreaming about reconciliation. Maybe my mother had reflected on her life and regretted the distance between us. Maybe she'd finally acknowledge my accomplishments. Maybe we could begin healing the wounds of my childhood. I allowed hope to build, dangerous as it was, because the alternative, accepting that my own mother might never love me properly, was too painful to bear. The night before the dinner, I called Rachel. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "Just remember," Rachel said gently, "you're not that helpless kid anymore. You're successful, kind, and worthy of respect. Don't let them make you forget that." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I just want them to see who I've become." "I know," she replied. "Just be prepared for the possibility that they might not be ready to." I should have listened more carefully to Rachel's warning. Instead, I spent $800 on a new dress, had my hair and makeup professionally done, and purchased a pair of sapphire earrings that cost more than my first month's rent in Chicago. I wanted to look successful, confident, unaffected by years of emotional neglect. The earrings, which matched my mother's birthstone, were wrapped in silver paper with a card expressing sincere wishes for her happiness. As I drove to the Grand Palace that evening, stomach fluttering with anticipation and hope, I had no idea I was driving toward a breaking point that would forever change my relationship with my family. The Grand Palace lived up to its name: crystal chandeliers, marble columns, waitstaff in formal attire. I arrived precisely on time, gift tucked under my arm, wearing my new navy dress and the confidence I'd worked so hard to build. The maitre d' directed me to a private room in the back where my family was already gathered around a long, elegantly set table. I paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. My mother sat at the head of the table, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a designer dress I recognized from the latest collection of her favorite luxury brand. My father sat at her right hand, distinguished in his tailored suit, while my sister Brooke occupied the place of honor on her left. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the remaining seats. I counted 12 people, all laughing and talking over flutes of champagne. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room. Aunt Patricia noticed me first, her conversation trailing off. Others turned to look, creating a wave of silence that finally reached my mother. "Stephanie," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "You made it." I smiled, moving toward the table. "Happy birthday, Mom. You look beautiful." I approached with the wrapped gift, but before I could reach her, she gestured toward the far corner of the room. "We're actually at capacity at the main table. There's a seat for you over there." That's when I saw it, a metal folding chair positioned against the wall, next to the swinging door leading to the kitchen. A small side table had been placed beside it, with a single place setting. From that spot, I would be separated from the main table by about 10 feet. Close enough to observe, but not truly participate. To make matters worse, the restaurant's trash and recycling bins were partially visible from that vantage point, having been discreetly placed in an alcove near the kitchen entrance. I stood frozen, gift still in hand, as my mother's words registered. "Sorry, sweetheart." She continued with that familiar smirk, "This table's for family only." A chuckle rippled through the gathering. My cousin Tyler snorted audibly, Even my father smiled briefly before becoming suddenly interested in his water glass. "Mom, there's room," Brooke said, though her protest was half-hearted at best. "We could squeeze another chair in." "Nonsense," my mother replied. "The servers need space to work. Stephanie doesn't mind. Do you, dear? You've always been so independent." Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel heat rising in my cheeks, but years of practice helped me maintain my composure. "Of course not," I heard myself say, voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. I moved toward the folding chair, conscious of my designer heels clicking against the marble floor. As I passed the main table, I placed the wrapped earrings next to my mother's plate. "Happy birthday," I repeated, more quietly this time. The conversation resumed almost immediately, my arrival already forgotten. I sat down, smoothing my dress, and placed my purse on the floor beside me. A server appeared, looking uncomfortable as he poured water into my glass. "Can I bring you some champagne, ma'am?" he asked, voice lowered as if sharing a secret. "Yes, please," I replied, attempting a smile. From my isolated position, I had a perfect view of the entire family but remained distinctly outside their circle. My mother was holding court, describing the Mediterranean cruise she and my father had taken the previous month. I hadn't known about any cruise. "The Greek islands were simply magical," she was saying. "We're thinking of doing the Scandinavian capitals next summer. Richard has a colleague with a vacation home in Copenhagen who's offered to host us for part of the trip." Aunt Jessica caught my eye briefly, offering a sympathetic smile before quickly looking away. We had always gotten along well. She was my mother's younger sister and seemed to understand my position in the family better than most. But even she had never openly challenged my mother's treatment of me. The first course arrived, delicate scallops on beds of pureed cauliflower with truffle oil. Mine came several minutes after everyone else's, the delay noticeable enough that my cousin Madison commented, "Looks like they forgot about Stephanie again." This prompted another round of laughter. I ate silently, watching as my family discussed vacations I hadn't been invited to, weekend gatherings I'd never heard about, and inside jokes I didn't understand. Tyler showed photos from the family's annual 4th of July barbecue, an event I used to attend as a child but hadn't been invited to in years. "Oh, you should have seen Uncle Robert trying to operate the new grill," my mother said between bites. "It was absolutely hilarious." I recorded it. Brooke chimed in, pulling out her phone. "Here, Mom, I'll send it to the family group chat." Family group chat. I didn't even know such a thing existed. As the main course arrived, Wagyu beef for most of the table. With my mother upgrading to the special lobster thermidor listed as market price on the menu, I noticed the waitstaff exchanging glances whenever they approached my isolated seat. One younger server looked so distressed on my behalf that I gave her a reassuring nod. "It's fine," I whispered when she refilled my water glass. "I'm used to it." But was I really? Sitting there in my carefully chosen dress, watching my family deliberately exclude me from their circle, I realized that adulthood had provided only the illusion of escape. I had my own home, my own business, my own life, yet here I was, right back in the role of family outcast, the designated other against whom everyone else could unite. The sommelier approached the main table, presenting an expensive bottle of red wine for my father's approval. After it was poured for everyone at the main table, my mother glanced over at me. "Oh, Stephen," she called to the sommelier. "Please don't forget my other daughter over there. Though perhaps just half a glass for her, it's quite expensive." More laughter. More humiliation. I accepted the half-pour with a tight smile, wondering how much longer I could endure this performance. As dinner progressed, I became increasingly aware of the contrast between the evening I had hoped for and the reality I was experiencing. I had imagined meaningful conversation, perhaps some acknowledgement of my achievements, maybe even a moment of genuine connection with my mother. Instead, I was quite literally sidelined. treated as an unwelcome obligation rather than a beloved daughter. The swing door behind me opened and closed repeatedly as servers bustled in and out of the kitchen, occasionally wafting cooking smells and the clatter of dishes my way. Each time someone at the main table glanced in my direction, I straightened my posture and maintained my dignified expression, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. But inside, a familiar childhood feeling was resurging, that desperate, aching need to understand why I wasn't good enough. Why I alone had been deemed unworthy of love and inclusion in this family. What had I done? What fundamental flaw did I possess that justified this consistent rejection? As I picked at my food, I realized that in anticipating this dinner, I had been hoping for the impossible, that my mother would suddenly transform into someone capable of maternal love toward me, that my family would magically see and value me after decades of established patterns. I had dressed up not just my body, but also my expectations, and both now seemed painfully naive. The dinner reached a new level of exclusion when my mother tapped her crystal glass with a spoon, commanding attention from the table. "Before dessert," she announced, "Brooke and Carter have something special to share." All eyes turned to my sister and her boyfriend of 3 years. Brooke beamed as she raised her left hand, revealing a sparkling diamond ring that certainly hadn't been there when I arrived. "We're engaged," she exclaimed as the table erupted in cheers and congratulations. My father stood immediately, champagne flute raised. To Brooke and Carter, who have made this birthday even more special by choosing today to announce their engagement. Your mother and I couldn't be happier to welcome Carter officially into the family. More champagne appeared as everyone took turns admiring Brooke's ring and embracing the happy couple. I remained frozen in my folding chair, processing this revelation. An engagement announcement, no wonder I'd been relegated to the sidelines. I wasn't meant to be part of this important family moment. I was merely an afterthought, invited out of obligation rather than desire. When the excitement settled slightly, I stood and walked to the main table. "Congratulations, Brooke," I said, offering a genuine smile. Whatever issues existed between our mother and me weren't my sister's fault. "I'm really happy for you both." Brooke looked up, almost surprised to see me. "Thanks, Steph." I reached out to hug her, but before I could, my mother interjected. "Stephanie, we're about to take family photos. Why don't you wait until we're finished?" I stepped back, the rejection stinging anew. As I returned to my isolated seat, I heard my mother instructing everyone to gather around Brooke and Carter. Phones appeared, capturing the moment from every angle. Not a single person suggested including me in the photos. "We've already started planning the wedding," my mother announced proudly once everyone was seated again. "The country club has an opening next June. We've put down the deposit. It's going to be beautiful," Aunt Patricia added. Amanda's been collecting ideas for months. Months. They had known about this engagement for months. The realization struck me like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous announcement. It was a planned family event. One I had been deliberately kept in the dark about until this public moment. As if to confirm my suspicions, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "And this is a little something to mark the occasion," she said, presenting it to Brooke. Inside was a pair of diamond earrings that made my sapphire gift look paltry in comparison. "They were your grandmother's," my mother explained. "I've been saving them for this day. Family heirlooms." Another reminder of my outsider status. I wondered briefly what, if anything, had been set aside for me. The conversation shifted to wedding plans, venues I'd never see, fittings I wouldn't be invited to, a bridal shower I'd likely hear about after the fact. I sipped my wine, feeling increasingly invisible as the evening progressed. Then I heard my name mentioned and tuned back in. "Stephanie might be able to help with that," Aunt Jessica was saying. "Her marketing business is doing quite well, isn't it?" All eyes turned to me, evaluating. My mother's expression was particularly calculating. That's right, she said slowly. Stephanie's little website business. You do invitations and such, don't you, dear? I run a full-service digital marketing agency, I corrected gently. We handle brand strategy, content creation, and campaign management for clients across multiple industries. How interesting, my mother replied, clearly uninterested. Perhaps you could do Brooke's wedding website. Pro bono, of course, as your gift to your sister. Before I could respond, my father jumped in. Speaking of business ventures, we've got some exciting news on the family front as well. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought he might mention my recent success. Mitchell Digital had just landed our biggest client yet, a national restaurant chain that would put us on the map in our industry. Instead, he continued, we've decided to expand Mitchell Family Investments to include some of the younger generation. Tyler, Madison, and Brooke will be joining as junior partners next month. Mitchell Family Investments? I set down my wine glass, confused. I had never heard of this entity before. What is Mitchell Family Investments? I asked, directing the question to my father. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. It's a small investment corporation your mother and I established about 5 years ago. We pool family resources for real estate and stock investments. The returns have been quite impressive, Uncle David added. Almost 12% last year. We're very selective about partners, my mother said pointedly. Only those who share our values and vision for the family's future. The message couldn't have been clearer. I wasn't considered part of that future. For 5 years, my family had been building a financial collaboration that explicitly excluded me. The careful phrasing, those who share our values, was a familiar weapon, one my mother had wielded throughout my childhood to indicate my fundamental failure to meet her expectations. I glanced around the table, wondering if anyone else recognized the cruelty of discussing this venture in front of me. Aunt Jessica was studying her plate intently. My father had become absorbed in his wine glass again. Only Cousin Tyler seemed to be enjoying the moment, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Stephanie helped me out last year when my car broke down, Brooke said suddenly, perhaps sensing my discomfort. Remember, Mom? She sent me $2,500 for the transmission repair. I had indeed wired Brooke the money when she called in tears, stranded in a small town during a business trip. She had promised to pay me back when her next commission check arrived. But the repayment never materialized and eventually I stopped asking. How generous, my mother said dismissively. Though, if she'd been part of the family investment group, she might have her own resources for such emergencies. The conversation moved on, but I remained stuck on this revelation. Not only had I been excluded from family vacations, holidays, and photo opportunities, but I had also been deliberately kept out of a family financial venture that apparently everyone else knew about. The systematic nature of my exclusion was breathtaking in its thoroughness. As dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate soufflé for the main table. A simple vanilla ice cream for me, my mother mentioned casually. Oh, Stephanie, I've been meaning to tell you. We finally cleared out your old bedroom. Donated most of it. But there was hardly anything worth keeping anyway. You cleaned out my room? I asked, setting down my spoon. When? Last month. We're converting it to a proper guest room now that Brooke and Carter will be staying over more often. Your father found some old journals in the closet. I told him no one needs to read a teenager's melodramatic scribblings, so those went into the recycling. My journals. The private writings that had sustained me through the loneliest years of my adolescence. The records of my thoughts, dreams, and pain, discarded without a second thought. Without even the courtesy of asking if I wanted them. I had some first edition books in that closet, I said quietly. Signed copies of Toni Morrison and Margaret Atwood. My mother waved a dismissive hand. If they were valuable, you should have taken them when you left for college. I was 18 with 2 suitcases and a bus ticket, I reminded her. You said I could leave my things until I had my own place. Well, that was 14 years ago, she replied. You can hardly expect us to maintain a shrine to your childhood indefinitely. I fell silent, processing this final violation. My past had been literally discarded, the physical remnants of my childhood deemed worthless and disposed of without my knowledge or consent. It was the perfect metaphor for my place in this family, unnecessary, unwanted, unworthy of consideration. As coffee was served to the main table, none offered to me. I checked my phone beneath the tablecloth. A text from Rachel had arrived. "How's it going? Remember, your worth isn't determined by their treatment of you." For the first time that evening, I felt tears threatening. Someone in this world valued me, even if my family did not. Someone would have asked before throwing away my most precious possessions. Someone would have included me in their financial planning, their vacation photos, their dinner table. That's when I knew, with absolute clarity, that something had to change. I could not continue this pattern of hoping for acceptance from people determined to reject me. I could not keep offering emotional and financial support to a family that treated me as an inconvenient obligation. I could not maintain my dignity while accepting such blatant disrespect. I looked up from my phone to find my mother watching me with that familiar expression of disapproval. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The desperate need for her approval, the driving force of my entire life, began to loosen its grip on my heart. "I think it's time for a toast," my mother announced as dessert plates were being cleared. The server appeared with a fresh bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon, I noticed, and began filling glasses around the main table. My mother stood, glass raised. To 60 years of a life well lived, surrounded by the people who matter most. She paused, her gaze sweeping around the table, deliberately skipping over my corner. "To family, those who truly understand the meaning of loyalty and belonging." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. I noticed my own glass remained empty. When the server approached with the bottle, my mother made a subtle stopping motion with her hand. "No need to waste it," she said quietly, but loudly enough for me to hear. That was the moment something broke inside me, or perhaps it was something finally breaking free. The careful facade I'd maintained all evening cracked, allowing decades of suppressed hurt and anger to rise to the surface. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. All conversation halted as heads turned in my direction. "Stephanie?" my father questioned, looking confused by this disruption to the carefully orchestrated evening. I didn't immediately respond, taking instead a moment to study each face around the table. My mother's irritation, my father's discomfort, Brooke's fleeting guilt, Tyler's amusement, Aunt Jessica's sympathy. The varying degrees of complicity in my lifelong exclusion were written across each expression. For 32 years, I finally said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "I've tried to earn a place at this table. I've achieved academic success, built a thriving business, become someone I'm proud to be, all while hoping that someday it would be enough. That someday I would be enough." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the servers had frozen in place. "But tonight has made something abundantly clear," I continued. "There is no achievement, no success, no version of myself that will ever be sufficient to earn your acceptance. The problem was never me, it was your determination to have someone occupy the role of family outcast." "Stephanie, you're making a scene," my mother hissed, glancing around as if worried others might witness this breach of decorum. "I'm speaking my truth," I corrected her. "For once in my life, I'm acknowledging reality instead of clinging to the fantasy that you might someday love me the way you love Brooke." My sister flinched at the mention of her name. "Steph, that's not fair," she protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I asked, turning to her. "When was the last time you sat by the kitchen door at a family dinner? When was the last time your achievements were dismissed or your belongings thrown away without your knowledge? When was the last time you were excluded from a family investment opportunity or a vacation or even the family group chat?" Brooke had no answer, her gaze dropping to her lap. I reached for my purse, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of forced family bonds. I've spent my entire life trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, trying to understand what fundamental flaw made me unworthy of the love and respect freely given to everyone else at this table. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter with each word spoken. But I see now that the question itself was wrong. There is nothing wrong with me. The flaw lies in a family system that requires a scapegoat to function, in a mother who can only define her worth in comparison to someone else's failures. That's enough, my father interjected, his authoritative courtroom voice emerging. You're upset. But this is hardly the time or place for such accusations. When would be the appropriate time, Dad? I asked quietly. During one of our non-existent father-daughter lunches? In the family meetings I'm never invited to? Or perhaps via the family group chat I didn't know existed until tonight. My phone buzzed in my hand, another text from Rachel. Whatever's happening. Remember, you can leave at any time. I'm here. Those words, you can leave at any time, resonated through me like a bell of clarity. I had always had the power to walk away, to choose myself, to refuse participation in my own diminishment. I had simply been too afraid to use it. I'm going to use the restroom, I announced, needing a moment to compose myself before taking the next step. In the elegant bathroom, I stared at my reflection, the carefully applied makeup, the expensive dress, the sapphire earrings that matched my mother's birthstone. I had dressed for a reconciliation that was never going to happen, prepared for an acceptance that was never going to be offered. I splashed cold water on my wrists, a calming technique Rachel had taught me years ago. Then I touched up my lipstick, straightened my shoulders, and made a decision that would change everything. This would be the last time I participated in my own rejection. The last time I accepted the role of family outcast. The last time I prioritized the hope of belonging over my own dignity and self-worth. I texted Rachel, "It's worse than I imagined. We'll call you after." Her response was immediate. "I've got wine, ice cream, and a shoulder ready whenever you need them." With that support bolstering me, I returned to the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted in my absence, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I appeared, glances that communicated unspoken messages across the table. My mother was speaking in low tones to my father, who nodded occasionally, his expression grave. I returned to my isolated seat without comment. For the remainder of dessert, I observed my family with new eyes, not as the approval-seeking daughter desperate for inclusion, but as an adult woman capable of setting boundaries and making choices about who deserved a place in my life. I noted how my mother subtly dominated every conversation, how my father deferred to her in all things, how the entire family oriented themselves around her approval. I saw Tyler's casual cruelty as a reflection of his own insecurity, Brooke's silent complicity as fear rather than malice. I recognized Aunt Jessica's kind glances as the actions of someone caught in the same system, unable or unwilling to challenge it directly. Most importantly, I saw myself clearly not as the flawed, unworthy person I had been conditioned to believe I was, but as someone who had survived this dynamic and built a meaningful life despite it. Someone who had friends who loved her, clients who respected her, and strengths that had nothing to do with her family's validation. When the server approached with coffee for the main table, I politely declined when he hesitantly offered me a cup. "No, thank you," I said with a genuine smile. I won't be staying much longer. Something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer waiting for their acceptance or inclusion. I was no longer seeking a seat at their table. For the first time in my life, I was ready to walk away, not in hurt or anger, but in the calm certainty that I deserved better. As I sat quietly observing the family dynamics with this new perspective, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The breaking point had come, and with it, an unexpected gift. Freedom from the desperate need for approval that had shaped my entire existence. The dinner had stretched to nearly 3 hours. with my family seeming to forget my presence for long stretches before occasionally remembering to throw a comment or question my way. Throughout the evening, their orders had grown increasingly extravagant, my mother insisting everyone try the special truffle risotto as an additional side dish, my father ordering a third bottle of premium wine, Brooke requesting the off-menu chocolate soufflé that required 30 minutes of preparation time. I had watched silently as they consumed course after course, bottle after bottle, their inhibitions lowering as their consumption increased. Uncle David had ordered the aged scotch at $75 per glass. Aunt Patricia had insisted on the special caviar appetizer when she heard another table receiving it. My cousin Madison had requested the lobster despite having already ordered the Wagyu beef, claiming she just wanted to try a bite before leaving most of it untouched. Throughout this display, I noticed my mother occasionally glancing in my direction with a particular expression, calculating, almost smug. At first, I couldn't quite interpret it, but as the evening progressed, certain comments began to clarify her expectations. Stephanie's business must be doing quite well these days, she remarked to the table at large while examining the wine list and selecting a bottle nearly twice the price of the previous one. She mentioned landing some important new client. Later, when discussing Brooke's engagement, of course, weddings are terribly expensive these days. It's so fortunate when family members can contribute in meaningful ways. And most tellingly, when my father briefly expressed concern about ordering the third bottle of wine, "Don't worry about it, Richard. I'm sure Stephanie won't mind showing her appreciation for being included tonight." The pattern became clear. My mother had invited me not out of any desire for reconciliation, but with the expectation that I would fund this lavish celebration. My place by the kitchen door, my systematic exclusion throughout the evening, my deliberate humiliation, all while anticipating that I would pay for the privilege of this treatment. It was breathtaking in its calculation. She had correctly assessed that my business was succeeding, had assumed I would be desperate enough for family acceptance to overlook any mistreatment, and had planned to exploit both my financial success and my emotional vulnerability. As coffee and digestives were served, I noticed the servers beginning the subtle dance that precedes the presentation of the bill. The head waiter approached, black leather folder in hand, and hesitated briefly, looking between my isolated position and the main table. My mother solved his dilemma with a wave of her bejeweled hand. "Oh, you can give that to my daughter Stephanie," she said loudly. "She's treating us tonight in honor of my birthday." The waiter looked uncomfortable but proceeded toward me with the folder. I could feel every eye on me as he approached, the weight of expectation almost palpable in the air. "Your bill, ma'am," he said quietly, presenting the folder with a sympathetic glance. I accepted it with a composed smile, opening it slowly while maintaining eye contact with my mother across the room. The total stared up at me, $4,647.83, nearly $5,000 for an evening of deliberate exclusion and calculated humiliation. The figure might have shocked me once, might have sent me scrambling to protect my business's operating capital while simultaneously seeking to earn my mother's approval through financial sacrifice. But that version of me had left the building the moment I'd made my decision in the bathroom. In her place was a woman who understood her worth and refused to participate in her own diminishment any longer. I closed the folder and handed it back to the waiter. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice clear enough to carry to the main table. "I was informed this table is for family only, and I've been seated separately all evening." I gestured to my folding chair by the kitchen door. "This isn't my table." The silence that descended was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to dim as every family member processed my response. The waiter, caught in an increasingly uncomfortable situation, looked toward the main table uncertainly. Should I? My mother's face had transformed from smug expectation to shocked outrage. "Stephanie," she hissed, "don't be ridiculous. Of course you're covering the bill. Why else would you be here? And there it was, the truth laid bare with a clarity that was almost beautiful in its starkness. In my mother's mind, my only value to the family was financial. My presence was tolerated not out of love or desire for connection, but out of the expectation that I would provide material benefit. I'm here because I was invited to celebrate your birthday, I replied evenly. An invitation that, I now understand, came with unspoken conditions and expectations. But I didn't agree to fund a $4,600 dinner, especially one where I was deliberately excluded and humiliated. My father cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. Stephanie, be reasonable. Your mother specifically mentioned you would be treating us tonight when she arranged the reservation. Did she? I asked, genuinely curious. That's interesting. Since she never mentioned it to me. Not when she called with the invitation, not when I arrived, not at any point during these 3 hours. The waiter shifted anxiously from foot to foot, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. My mother's face had flushed an alarming shade of red, while my father looked increasingly concerned, not about the treatment I had endured, I noted, but about the impending financial responsibility. Well, this is just perfect, my mother snapped. Making a scene on my birthday, embarrassing us in front of everyone. This is exactly why you're not included in family functions, Stephanie. You simply cannot behave appropriately. I smiled, feeling oddly calm in the face of her anger. I understand now. Appropriate behavior means accepting mistreatment without complaint and paying for the privilege. Thank you for clarifying. That's actually very helpful information for the decisions I'm making tonight. I stood, gathering my purse and wrap. To the waiter, I said gently, I apologize for the confusion, but I won't be covering this bill. As has been made abundantly clear all evening, I'm not considered part of this family gathering. Then I turned to the table at large. It's been illuminating. Truly. I came tonight hoping for reconciliation, for some acknowledgement of my place in this family. Instead, I received confirmation of what I've suspected for years, that my only value to you is what material benefit I can provide. Stephanie Mitchell, my mother began, her voice taking on the dangerous tone I remembered from childhood. If you walk out that door without paying this bill, you are no longer welcome in this family. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, liberating sound that seemed to startle everyone, including myself. Mom, I haven't been welcome in this family since the day I was born. The only difference is that now, finally, we're both acknowledging it. I turned to leave, then paused for one final observation. You know what's interesting? In all these years of trying to earn your approval, I never realized I had a choice. I never understood that I could simply walk away from people who don't value me. So, in a way, I should thank you for making things so unmistakably clear tonight. With that, I walked toward the exit. My steps growing lighter with each foot of distance I put between myself and the toxic family dynamic that had defined my life for so long. Behind me, I could hear my mother's indignant protests, my father's attempts to smooth things over with the restaurant staff, and the confused murmurs of relatives trying to process what had just happened. None of it touched me. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated with basic human decency. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I took a deep breath that felt like my first truly free breath in 32 years. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Rachel, on my way. And you were right, I could leave at any time. The fallout was swift and predictable. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with messages and calls. I silenced it without looking, needing space to process the seismic shift that had occurred within me. I drove to Rachel's apartment across town, the city lights blurring slightly as tears finally came, not tears of sadness or regret, but of release. Rachel opened her door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a fierce hug. That bad? Worse, I replied, following her inside. And better, somehow. Over glasses of wine, I recounted the evening in detail, the fold-out chair by the trash cans, the family investment group I'd never been told about, the journals and books discarded without my knowledge, and finally, the expectation that I would pay for the entire extravagant dinner despite being treated as an unwelcome outsider. And then I just walked away, I concluded, still somewhat surprised by my own actions. Left them with the bill and walked out. Rachel raised her glass in a toast. It's about damn time, Steph. I've been watching them treat you like garbage for a decade, waiting for you to realize you deserve better. My phone, face down on Rachel's coffee table, had been lighting up consistently throughout our conversation. When I finally gathered the courage to check, I found 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and multiple social media notifications. The texts ranged from my mother's threats, "You have embarrassed this entire family," and "Your inheritance is officially forfeited," to my father's attempts at guilt, "Your mother is in tears." And this was extremely disappointing behavior, to Brooke's confused outrage. "How could you ruin Mom's birthday like this?" Most surprising were the social media tags my mother had actually posted publicly about the incident, describing how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned the family during a birthday celebration, leaving them with an exorbitant bill. She had carefully crafted the narrative to position herself as the victim, tagging family members who quickly added supportive comments. "She's trying to control the story," Rachel observed, reading over my shoulder. "Classic narcissist move. She's afraid of what you might say, so she's getting ahead of it." I nodded, strangely unmoved by this predictable attempt at manipulation. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm done. That night, I slept on Rachel's couch, experiencing the most peaceful rest I'd had in years. The next morning, I returned to my apartment to find Brooke waiting outside my door, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "What the hell was that about?" she demanded as I unlocked my door. "Mom's birthday dinner, Steph? Really? That was when you chose to have your dramatic meltdown." I invited her inside, maintaining the calm certainty I'd discovered the previous night. "It wasn't a meltdown, Brooke. It was a boundary." "A boundary? You embarrassed everyone and stuck Dad with a $4,600 bill. A bill I was never consulted about," I pointed out. "Putting on coffee for us both. A bill that was accumulated while I sat by the kitchen door, excluded from family photos, and listened to discussions about family vacations and investment opportunities I'd never been told about." Brooke shifted uncomfortably. "The seating arrangement was unfortunate." "But it wasn't unfortunate, it was deliberate," I interrupted gently. "Just like not telling me about Mitchell family investments was deliberate. Just like throwing away my journals and books without asking was deliberate. Just like planning your engagement announcement for Mom's birthday dinner without mentioning it to me was deliberate." Brooke's eyes widened slightly at the last point. "How did you know we planned that in advance?" "Mom said she's been saving Grandma's earrings for this day. Plus, you don't reserve a private room at the Grand Palace and invite the entire extended family for a regular birthday." I handed her a mug of coffee. "I'm not angry about your engagement, by the way. I'm happy for you and Carter. I'm just tired of being the only person in this family who isn't given basic information or consideration. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives." Brooke really looked at me not as her slightly embarrassing older sister who somehow always displeased their mother, but as a person with legitimate feelings and experiences. "Has it really been that bad?" she asked quietly. "Worse," I replied honestly. "Last night wasn't an isolated incident, Brooke. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated as less than, of being the family scapegoat while you were the golden child." "That's not fair," she protested, but with less conviction than before. "Isn't it? When was the last time you were seated away from the family at a gathering? When was the last time your achievements were dismissed or your belongings thrown away? When was the last time you were excluded from a family vacation or investment opportunity?" Brooke stared into her coffee cup, unable to provide examples. "I don't blame you," I continued softly. The dynamic was established long before either of us had any say in it. Mom needed someone to be the perfect daughter and someone to be the disappointment. We were just playing the roles assigned to us. I never wanted to hurt you, Brooke said, her voice small. I just didn't want to end up in your position. The admission hung in the air between us, the first honest acknowledgement of the family dynamic that had shaped both our lives. For Brooke, compliance with our mother's expectations had been a survival strategy, a way to avoid becoming the target I had always been. I understand, I told her, but I can't participate in it anymore. I can't keep hoping that someday I'll be good enough to earn a place at the table. Last night made it clear that will never happen. So what now? Brooke asked. You're just done with the family. I'm done with the dysfunction, I clarified. I'm done accepting mistreatment. I'm done being the designated outsider. If there's going to be any relationship moving forward, it has to be based on mutual respect. Brooke nodded slowly, processing this shift. Before she left, she hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, I think what you did last night took courage. I'm not sure I could have done it. It wasn't an apology or a promise to advocate for me, but it was perhaps the first genuine moment of connection we'd shared as adults. It was a start. Throughout the day, the barrage of messages continued. My mother left increasingly angry voicemails, culminating in a final threat. You have officially been removed from the will. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving or Christmas. You're no longer welcome at family gatherings. My father's approach was more measured, but equally manipulative. Your mother is devastated, Stephanie. I understand you were upset about the seating arrangement, but this reaction is disproportionate. We need you to apologize so we can move past this unfortunate incident. Neither acknowledged the broader pattern of exclusion and disrespect. Neither recognized that the previous night had merely been the breaking point after decades of systematic rejection. They were still operating under the assumption that I would eventually fall back in line, desperate enough for their approval to accept whatever terms they dictated. That evening, after careful consideration, I composed a single email addressed to my entire family. Last night at the Grand Palace restaurant, I was seated apart from the family table, excluded from photographs, and informed of family events and financial opportunities one had never been told about. When the bill arrived, it became clear that the only reason I had been invited was to pay for everyone's extravagant meal. This was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a lifelong pattern. I have spent 32 years trying to earn acceptance from people determined to cast me as the family outsider. I have contributed financially when asked, maintained contact despite consistent rejection, and continued to hope that someday I would be welcomed as a full member of this family. I now recognize that this hope was based on an illusion. Moving forward, I will only maintain relationships with those who demonstrate basic respect and consideration. I will no longer participate in family gatherings where I am treated as less than. I will no longer provide financial support without reciprocal emotional support. This is not a negotiation or an attempt to elicit apologies. It is simply a statement of boundaries that are long overdue. Stephanie. I sent the email, then blocked my mother's and father's numbers. I muted the family group chats I had been added to only to be targeted with guilt and anger. I set my social media accounts to private. For the first time in my adult life, I was creating a protective barrier between myself and the toxic family dynamic that had caused so much pain. The response was predictable. More social media posts painting me as ungrateful and unstable, more attempts to contact me through alternate phone numbers, more pressure applied through the few family members I hadn't blocked. I held firm in my silence, focusing instead on my business, my true friends, and my own healing process. A week after the dinner, I received an unexpected text from Aunt Jessica. I've watched Amanda treat you unfairly your entire life and said nothing. That makes me complicit, and I'm truly sorry. If you're open to it, I'd like to have a relationship with you independent of your mother. No pressure, just know the door is open. It was the first acknowledgement from any family member that the problem wasn't my behavior, but the dysfunctional system itself. I agreed to meet Jessica for coffee. Beginning a tentative but honest relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. As weeks passed, the intensity of the family's reaction diminished. My mother's narrative shifted from outrage over the unpaid bill to concern about my mental health issues, a transparent attempt to discredit my perspective. My father occasionally sent brief emails, always focused on when I would come to my senses rather than addressing the underlying issues. Brooke maintained sporadic contact, her messages suggesting she was beginning to question aspects of our family dynamic she had previously accepted without thought. Through it all, I maintained the boundaries I had established, engaging only with those who demonstrated respect for them. It wasn't always easy. Decades of conditioning had created deeply ingrained patterns that sometimes made me question my decision, wonder if I was overreacting, or feel guilty for causing family discord. In those moments, I returned to the memory of sitting by the trash cans at my mother's birthday dinner, watching my family laugh and celebrate without me even as they expected me to fund their evening. That memory served as an anchor, a reminder of the reality I had finally chosen to acknowledge rather than deny. 3 months after the dinner, I received a formal letter from my father's law firm confirming that I had indeed been removed from the family will and trust. What was intended as a punitive measure felt instead like the final severance of an unhealthy bond. Whatever financial inheritance I might have received could never compensate for the emotional cost of maintaining a relationship with people who fundamentally did not value me as a person. That night, I wrote in my new journal, a practice I had resumed as part of my healing process. Today, I was officially disinherited. The strange thing is, I feel relief rather than loss. Perhaps because I've realized that what I truly inherited from my family wasn't money or property, but patterns of behavior and belief systems about my own worth. And those are legacies I'm finally ready to renounce. 6 months after the fateful dinner at the Grand Palace, I stood in the doorway of my newly renovated home office, admiring the transformation. The walls, once stark white, now glowed with the warm terracotta that energized the space without overwhelming it. My desk faced the window overlooking a small garden I had planted in the spring, my first attempt at nurturing something living, a metaphor that wasn't lost on my therapist, Dr. Levine. Mitchell Digital Strategies had continued to thrive, expanding to a team of 7 with an office downtown. The national restaurant chain client had led to referrals in the hospitality industry, establishing us as specialists in that sector. I had recently been featured in Business Insider as one of the top 40 under 40 entrepreneurs in the Midwest, an achievement I celebrated with people who genuinely cheered my success rather than diminishing it. My phone chimed with a text from Rachel. "Still on for dinner tonight?" The whole gang's confirmed. The gang was what we affectionately called our chosen family, Rachel and her husband Mark, my college friend Daniel and his partner James, my neighbor Eliza, and a few other close friends who had formed a tight-knit support system over the years. We gathered for monthly dinners, holiday celebrations, and impromptu movie nights. They had been particularly present during my family estrangement, offering the unconditional acceptance I had spent decades seeking from people biologically programmed to provide it, but emotionally incapable of doing so. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, making my famous apple pie as we speak. As I slid the pie into the oven, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The weeks following my stand at the restaurant had been challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite knowing intellectually that I had made a healthy choice, my emotional response had included intense grief, not just for the relationships I had stepped away from, but for the family I had always wished for but never actually had. Dr. Levine had helped me understand that this grief was both natural and necessary. "You're mourning the loss of hope," she had explained during one particularly difficult session. "For your entire life, You've held onto the possibility that your family might someday see and value you. Letting go of that hope is a profound loss, even if the hope itself was based on an illusion. That framework had helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced as I established a new relationship with myself and redefined my understanding of family. I learned to recognize the internal critical voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother, questioning my decisions and finding fault with my achievements. I practiced replacing that voice with a more compassionate one, speaking to myself with the kindness I would offer a friend. I maintained the boundaries I had established, though they evolved as circumstances changed. When Aunt Jessica invited me to her 70th birthday celebration, I attended after confirming that the event would be at a restaurant with proper seating for all guests and separate checks. The evening had been awkward but manageable, with my mother maintaining a cold distance while my father attempted stilted small talk. I had left early but left with my dignity intact, a victory by any measure. Brooke and I had established a tentative new relationship, meeting occasionally for coffee without our parents' knowledge or involvement. These conversations had gradually become more honest, with Brooke acknowledging aspects of our family dynamic she had previously denied or minimized. "I always knew Mom was harder on you," she admitted during one such meeting. "But I told myself it was because she saw more potential in you, that she was pushing you to be better." "That's a common rationalization in dysfunctional families," I replied, sharing insights from my therapy without judgment. It's easier to believe there's a noble purpose behind cruelty than to acknowledge the cruelty itself. Brooke had nodded thoughtfully. "I'm starting to see patterns I never noticed before. Like how Mom always positions herself as the victim whenever she doesn't get her way. Or how Dad never contradicts her, even when she's clearly wrong." These conversations weren't always easy, but they represented a level of authenticity we had never before achieved. Brooke was planning her wedding without our mother's controlling influence, having recognized how Amanda's insistence on perfection masked a deeper need for control. She had even asked if I would consider being a bridesmaid, a gesture of inclusion that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "As long as I get a real chair at the reception," I had joked. Our shared laughter acknowledging both the pain of the past and the possibility of a different future. My relationship with my parents remained distant but no longer dominated my emotional landscape. My mother had attempted various strategies to regain control, showing up unannounced at my office, where my assistant politely turned her away, sending flying monkeys in the form of distant relatives to pressure me into reconciliation, and most recently, initiating a health scare that proved to be largely exaggerated. Each attempt reinforced my decision to maintain firm boundaries. My father had reached out once via email, ostensibly to inform me of a tax matter related to a small inheritance from a distant uncle, but really to assess my receptiveness to contact. I had responded politely but briefly, addressing only the practical matter without opening the door to further engagement. He had not written again. The timer on my oven beeped, pulling me back to the present moment. As I removed the golden brown pie, I caught my reflection in the window glass, relaxed, content, at peace in a way I had never experienced while still entangled in family dynamics that required my diminishment. Later that evening, seated around Rachel's expanded dining table with people who genuinely celebrated my presence, I realized that I had finally found what I had spent decades searching for, a sense of belonging based not on biology or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. "To chosen family," Rachel toasted, raising her glass. "To boundaries and self-respect," I added, clinking my glass against hers. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people secure in their connections to one another. No one was positioned by the trash cans. No one was excluded from photos. No one was expected to perform or achieve to earn their place at the table. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for board games, I received an unexpected text from Aunt Jessica. Thinking of you tonight. Proud of the boundaries you've established and the life you're creating. Your grandfather would be too. I smiled, appreciating both the sentiment and the respectful way it was delivered. No pressure, no agenda, just genuine support. I had learned that family connections weren't inherently valuable simply because of shared DNA. Some strengthened and nourished us, others depleted and damaged us. The wisdom lay in recognizing the difference and having the courage to act accordingly. As I looked around at the faces of my chosen family, people who knew my flaws and loved me anyway, who celebrated my successes without resentment, who created space for my authentic self without requiring performance or perfection, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The painful dinner at the Grand Palace had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough, forcing me to finally acknowledge what I had always known but been afraid to accept, that I deserved better. The journey wasn't over. I still occasionally caught myself slipping into old patterns, still felt twinges of the familiar guilt when setting boundaries, still experienced moments of grief for the family relationship I had always wanted but never had. Dr. Levine assured me this was normal, healing wasn't linear, and decades of conditioning couldn't be undone in 6 months. But I was moving forward with a new understanding of family, not as something defined solely by blood and obligation, but as something created through choice, nurtured through respect, and maintained through mutual care. I had discovered that walking away from toxicity wasn't an act of giving up, but an act of profound self-love. That setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but essential for authentic connection. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to stop trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it freely. 6 months after walking out of the Grand Palace restaurant, leaving my family with the bill and my dignity intact, I was building a life based on a revolutionary concept, the belief that I was worthy of respect simply because I existed, not because of what I achieved or provided. That belief, so simple yet so profound, had changed everything. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members for your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sometimes the most necessary act of self-preservation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of growth and transformation. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you deserve a seat at the table, not a folding chair by the trash.